I'm a web developer specialized in the front-end department, but I wasn't always a front-ender. So I started as a graphic designer. And after I graduated in Milan, I thought at ways in which I could merge my two passions, which was the visual arts and the computer, in which I was very passionate about those days. So it made sense to me to transition a little bit towards the UI development and the prototyping. Okay, so that is what I did until I specialized more in the user experience area. And after that came Nucleot, so my first startup, in which it gave me the opportunity to develop myself and transition to a full stack designer, which includes being able to start a project graphically with the layout and everything, and continuing through the prototyping phase and then to building the actual product. So yeah, in those years, I was able to also become a front-ender, actually. Okay, that just as an introduction. All right, so let's kick this off. Third day. So what we're going to talk about today is an introduction about CSS. So you know that those three main skills that a web developer needs to master are HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So today we're going to start with CSS, and throughout this course, you also see the basic of JavaScript, so don't worry. So what about CSS? CSS is our way to transform those crude and basic layout in HTML in something else. And I believe Diego showed you how from a simple HTML, you can basically create something so different from one another. Okay, so yeah, with CSS, you can move parts around, you can disrupt the flow of that layout. You can create many layers, different layers, you can move things even in places in which you don't even expect at the moment. But yeah, the CSS will give us all those powers. Okay, so we need to talk a little bit about the box model. Maybe you heard about it, but basically the box model is the way in which every element knows how to sit in the page. So every element is basically a box composed with various elements that we are going to see, in which you are able to create the layout with. Okay, so you need to think about the layout as a bunch of boxes, really, because that is how every divider is in the page. So it's just a box. So once you start to think about how can I move those boxes around, you can see your layout at a higher level, maybe. Okay, so it's important to know this box model in order to being able to do that. Okay, so we're going to see an introduction about selectors. So a selector is just our way for being able to target those elements and transform that visually. Okay. So, no joining the microphone, please. Okay, so those selectors is everything that we need to master in order to use the CSS rules. Okay, and we're going to see about that. Okay, so CSS allows us to style our HTML as we like. Without that, it will only be plain and boring elements with the default styling, because you need to know that the browser has some default rules, CSS rules, which is the user agent style sheet, that is responsible for showing you the button as a default styling. You know, when you see that gray button or the default input field, is just because otherwise you will only see the text perhaps of that element. But the browser is making sure that at least, even if you don't have any CSS written already, you can still see some basic elements as they should. Okay, so a button should be a button, a table should have border, and so on and so forth. So every DOM element uses the box model to reserve its own space in the page, as we previously said. Okay, so we need to be able to target the elements with our rules, and that is done via the selectors that we mentioned. Okay, So at the end of the day, you'll be able to style some element in your page. You'll know the syntax of the CSS rules and the main properties. So you can start fiddling around in order to get comfortable with, because CSS may look simple, but it's trivial. Something that you need to master and to have some experience with before you can start feeling comfortable with it. But it's pretty straightforward and easy to start using it. Okay. So we're going to do a little bit of a recap of what you saw 2 days ago, actually. So about the basic HTML tags and how to push everything on GitHub. Okay, so HTML and Git. So let's start with the HTML part. So let me grab my folder. Okay, so the easiest thing is to, when you install VS Code, make sure that you add this property in order to see this, which is really convenient. You can just right-click on the folder and open this folder with code. If you don't have it, don't worry, because you can always open VS Code and open a folder like that, okay? So no worries, just a nicer way and a more convenient way to do that. Okay, so once we opened Visual Studio Code and we are in the right folder, we can create our index. So every website needs to have an index, okay? So this is the first thing that we need to make sure that we have. So an index is composed by the HTML tag, which wraps everything, and the head, which is our configuration. Okay, so everything that is like a configuration for our web page, and the user doesn't have to see, but it's required in order for the page to work, goes in the head. So it can be titles, can be the CSS that we reference from outside, or the style tag, perhaps, can go in here. And every metadata, which is useful for the Google crawler in order to index our page in the Google search, okay, is very, very important. And also scripts. All right, so everything that is sort of like a configuration for our page is meant to be going in the head, okay. Also fonts, perhaps we can also add them here, fonts, scripts, fonts, and that's basically it, metadata we have. So inside of this HTML, we also have the body. So here goes everything that a user have to see. So content of the page, every visual layout thing, okay? So whichever thing you write in the body is going to be displayed in the page. We can try to just create our first title, main title of our page. Okay, if I save this and double click in here, we can see that the browser is able to display it. Another thing that is really useful for you in building your project, let me just dock it to the right so you can see it, okay, is the inspector. This is your best friend and always will be, okay? And as you can see, you have a little preview of the box model, which we're going to talk in some time, okay? So as you can see, this is the structure that we just created, okay? All right, so this is the exact representation of your file. You can always access it through the inspector, okay? All right, so why don't we just create this the proper way? So if you just type exclamation mark in VS Code and you press enter, you get this out of the box, okay? So you get those two meta tags, which are really useful. This is for safety reasons, and this is to just place the initial scale of the viewport. Otherwise, you have some issues in the mobile realm, okay? So as you can see here, you can have a title, which is actually the only thing that the user is going to see from this head, because our new page, this title is going to be displayed here, okay? So yeah, this is the only exception. Everything else that the user has to see needs to go in the body. All right. So let's create back our title. And as you know, we can have many of them. So a tag, this is a tag, is composed by these angular brackets, and you need to be very, very sure that you close those tags, because HTML is a very permissive language. It can work even if you forgot to close a tag. It will display the thing, but probably you're going to receive some strange results. And this is just the beginning of some really painful hours in trying to find where is that tag that you missed to close. Okay, so my suggestion is always try to go slow about it in the first times, because otherwise you really risk to lose so much time in that. Okay, so the way that you open one is by wrapping the tag in those angular brackets, and when you need to close it, you just need to be sure that you add the slash before the tag closure, tag name. Okay. Okay, so we have also H2 up until H6. Okay, and this is another helper for us. If you just write H6 in VS Code and press enter, you get the tag right away. Okay, so smallest title is this one. Second title, let's say, and let's see how this displays in the page. Okay, so as you can see, it's like a transition from H1 to H6, pretty small, right? So here you can see that there are some CSS rules already applied in there by the browser itself. This user agent style sheet is just the browser applying those basic rules. You can see every element has some basic rules. Okay. All right. So what can we add here? We can also add a div that wraps everything, maybe. And as we mentioned, everything in HTML is just a box, okay? We can wrap everything in one single box, as you can see. So the box will take the space of its children. So its space is determined by its children height and width, okay? Because, yeah, as you can see, there are no properties attached to the div by default, except that it's of display block. So there are two types of, maybe three, but basically two main types of display. The block thing, which is just an element that takes all the space, all the available space. Okay, so the title tags and the paragraph tags are just of display block. So this means they will always take all the available space in the width. As you can see, they are breaking to a new line. Each element is just breaking, even if we just have so much text that it could have been placed next to each other. But yeah, since they are of type block, as you can see, the user agent style sheet is telling this element to be displayed as block. We can always change this to inline. Okay, but since also this one is block, it will take the whole space up until we change this as well, inline. As you can see, now they are not taking the whole space, and we are able to display them one next to each other. So we can always override the default behavior of this user agent CSS, okay? And this is what it's meant to be doing. So this is not this powerful to always be displayed as block, but it always permits us to override default behavior, okay? So our job is to understand how we want the page to look like and to add some CSS to it in order to display the proper way, okay? But be mindful that we always get some default thing here, default styling by the user agent, because that is just how the browser works out of the box. And there are so many legacy things that so since it's a very ancient technology in terms of computer history, okay, we get something that is just something of the past, but we have to work with it. So as you may see, by default, the body as well has a margin, which we may not like if perhaps we add a background color to this first div, let's say gray. We get this not so nice margin here. Okay, if we want, we can always override this. Okay, so, and this is what most framework out there are doing. By default, they are reciting those default behaviors. Okay, so let's go back to the slides. All right, yeah, we need to talk a little bit more about HTML and then Git. All right, so what can we have also here? You know how to create lists, right? So we have two types of lists. One is unordered and one is ordered, okay? And we can have multiple elements. Element 1, let's say, you can copy this 3 times. All right. And the only thing that differ from one another is just the displaying property, the default displaying property. But this is something that we don't use very often. Okay, so we always need to, let me zoom a little bit. We always need to, use one or the other, but usually we don't use this default styling, so it doesn't make much of a use for the order list. So I rarely use this. Normally you just override the behavior to just have the list, but without the dots. But yeah, it's nice to know that you have those two things available to you. Okay, so we said that the div is displayed by default as a block, and also paragraphs are. So let's create a paragraph. And a paragraph. Okay, and we can see here, always the inspector is our best friend, that also the paragraph is of type block, and it will take the whole space available. Okay, if we constrain this to be with 50%, we can see that the amount of space available is reduced, but they still are taking the whole space. Okay, this is the normal behavior. But yeah, we have other tags available to us. So there's a span, which I'm a span. I will not take the whole space. So even if we have a little bit more text, if we hover over it, we can see that it's not taking the whole space. So it makes very much sense to use in combination to some block element. Okay, so this is how this was meant to be used inside of a block element, because it's not of type block, so it can be placed inside of paragraphs. Okay, and also another element that by default is of type of display in line is the anchor tag. So if we wanted, we could have made this span a link. Okay, so yeah, VS Code is working against me right now, but yeah, let me just place it here. And so the way in which we can create a link in the page to reference an outside page or a file inside of my project is with the anchor tag. The anchor tag is meant to be to create a link, okay? And it can have children. The only thing that's necessary is the link, the actual link. So href will hold a string for our link. We can say www.google.com, okay? And we can see that now, if I refresh, this becomes a link. If I click here, I go there. Let me see. Href. Okay, so I probably misspelled something. Okay, but as you can see, it will just take the available space, wrapping the element. Okay, it will not be of type block, so it makes very much sense to just use it inside of a paragraph, for example. Okay, so there are another element that we can add here, which will tell the anchor tag to open a new window for that in order for us to not lose our actual page, okay? So with the attribute target, we can specify blank with an underscore, blank, and our link will open in a new page, hopefully, but yeah, of course I need to refresh. Okay, okay, so let's see if with HTTPS maybe, and maybe we go to Stripe School. Okay, so this should work as intended. All right, yeah. Remember to add your HTTP. But as you can see, I've opened a new link and it's changed color because of a particular CSS property that if the link is visited, by default, it will turn purple, okay? But yeah, our simple span, as you can see, we still have a span here, has become a link, okay? But yeah, you can basically wrap any element in an anchor tag and that element will become clickable and I will create a link for you. All right, all clear? Okay, so of course, as we mentioned, we can always turn this paragraph to be just taking the space needed for the text. So we can always make this an inline element, okay? So as you can see now, we can probably chain multiple different paragraphs if only we add a style that says display inline, and I can copy this to this other element here. I'm the second paragraph with the same structure, so we should be able to see them one next to each other, okay? So yeah, this is the basic stuff that you can do. By knowing that, by default, divs and titles and paragraphs will take the whole space. You can always override that behavior if you want, for example, to have things next to each other, okay? So now that I've created the file, I may want to push this in order to see that on the web, or, you know, by using Git, it's meant to be a collaborator tool, okay? But it's not just meant for others. My advice is always use it, even if it doesn't make much sense or may look like too much work in the beginning, but it will save your life in many cases, okay? Because you can think like, okay, I always have the Ctrl-Z option, you know, to do at all times, but that is not always true. Maybe you need to try two different things or maybe more. And if you go back in time and modify some things, everything that was in the future, let's say, is lost, okay? So you either have to create backups or many files that reference the different point in time of the file or different snapshot of your project, or you can just use Git that will do that for you. So you can think of like a time machine or yeah, a snapshot of different moment in time, okay? And that is very useful also for you. So never forget that it's meant for you, for instance, before the others, okay? But it's extremely helpful in times in which you have to collaborate with others, because you can take that snapshot and create multiple alternate realities, let's say. And then once you decide with your teammates or colleagues which one is going to be the end result, you can merge all those realities in just your main project. Okay, you can merge those branches actually in creating some more functionality for your project. And yeah, that is the way in which you can do that. And it looks difficult in the beginning, I'll give you that. But once you master it, it's just the best thing that you can have in order to collaborate, okay? Because it will take care of conflicts. You will have so much visibility on what you are doing and also your teammates are doing. And you can go step by step in merging those files. And you can imagine in the old days, this being very difficult without this tool. Okay, you can imagine going over the file line by line and try to understand what's changed. And let me just show you how you can just see right away what's changed. Okay, so first things first, if you have Git installed and you write Git, you get the helper commands here. Okay, so if that works, you don't get an error, but you just get this list of commands that you can do. So the first command that you need to do is git init. Okay, or maybe if you didn't do it already, you need to do git config global user.name and specify your name. Okay, because yeah, you need to have those configuration in order to to be recognized, and also email here. Okay, if you didn't do it already, this is how you do it. You just place your email. Okay, but once you do the git init command, you should be able to see a Git folder here. Okay, so this is your repository, your local repository. Okay, so up until you push this in the cloud, it's just on your local machine. If you delete this, everything that you have in memory, every snapshot is going to be lost. Okay, so be very mindful about that. But yeah, the only way to be safe is just to push this in the cloud before doing anything. Okay, so even if you have a fire going on in your home, you need to git commit and git push. Okay, then the house can be burned down, but not before. So once this repository is pushed in the cloud, you can be sure that you're fine and you can always retrieve every step in the way. If you have problems, always push either way. Then you can resolve the problems by deleting your local folder afterwards, but not before. Okay. So every snapshot in time is going to be saved here somehow. Okay. We don't have to know exactly how, but the fact that we have this hidden folder here, it makes all the difference. Okay. So if you cannot see this folder, even if it's there, it's because if you're on Windows, you need to go here and change show hidden files. You know, by default, it's just here. Don't show hidden files. You need to do that. And maybe one other thing, hide extension for known file types. Even this one is checked by default. I usually take this out because it's much more useful to see the extension of your files. Okay, so doing that, you should be able to see it. Okay, so actually right now, since we have a .git folder, as you can see, Visual Studio Code recognizes it, and we have a blue bar here and a 1 symbol in our Git panel here. Okay, so it detected that there's one more file that has never been committed. So one thing that you can do, you can either stage it with a plus, and once it's staged, create a message and push it. Okay, so this is what we're going to do. But by clicking it, you can see side by side what's changed. So from not being there, nothing is there, as you can see. And the green lines represent what you've added, the file. Okay.
Sorry, Stefano,
Sure.
Could you repeat, please, this part?
Of course. So what we did actually was just to initialize our repository. And once we do that, we create our local repository with this .git folder. And it's this folder here which give us this functionality. Visual Studio Code will recognize that we have initialized a repository, and it also recognizes that there's one more file from being empty. So every file that you create will be detected by this tool here and every other Git manager. Okay, everything that you do will trigger a change, and therefore Git will detect that. It will detect every change that you do in your files. So the thing that you need to do if you are using this tool in VS Code is by pressing this plus to stage the changes, enter a message. So adding index.html can be anything, but it must contain something, cannot be empty. Okay, so then you press this check, which means commit. okay? But yeah, this is why I don't really like this tool, but yeah, there are many ways and many tools that you can use to manage Git, because it's not telling you that you need to push, but actually you need to do it, okay? But before you can push, we need to create the actual repository in GitHub. Otherwise, it doesn't know where to push to, right? So let's go to GitHub. We need to create a new repository. Let's call this week 1, day 3. It's going to be public, and we can add the README. And once we create this repository, we are going to have a way, in which, oh, sorry, got it. Thank you very much. Okay. So yeah, we have a way to copy this and add this to our repository. In order for our repository to know where to push to, yeah, we need to do git remote, add origin, and the link. Okay. In this way, we told our local repository, if ever we do a git push, you know where to do it. Okay. So the other thing that we need to do is to do git push. The first time we need the -u origin main, or yeah, there are a small thing that I need to do before that, because since Black Lives Matter, they decided to change the master branch to main. So when we create when we do a git init, the main branch is called master. We need to change this because now they want to use main. This is how you change your master to main. And then we can do git push -u origin. Okay. So by doing this, let's see what happened. All right. So let's do a git pull before, because we created a file. Yeah. Remote. So let me just do this again for you so I don't get you confused. All right. So I'm going to delete this. And if you want to do it, you just need to from this step here. So let's start over. New. Week 1, git 3. This time I'm not adding anything. So you can see also all the commands that you can do. So as I mentioned, you can add a README, but if you do it locally, it will be better. Otherwise, you need to push from the origin before. So we did a git branch -m main. We need to add this again, probably. Let's do it just to be sure. Already exists, perfect. So let's try again. All right. So as you can see, it created a conflict, the fact that the other place already had a file which we didn't have locally. So just to be sure, do the actual step that I did. Okay. So since we pushed, we should be able to see here the changes. So as you can see, we have the index HTML, the exact same thing that we wrote. Okay. So just to recap everything, once you create the local repository with git init, you get the .git folder. Then you need to tell your local where is your remote and where to push to. If you do git push -u or -u, you don't have to always specify origin main. So you just need to do this one time, and every next time you can just do git push like that. Okay. Everything up to date. Perfect. Okay, so now every change that I make on my file, if I delete one element here, oh yeah, I'm in the diff panel. Okay, so if I save here, as you can see, the text has changed. Something has changed. We can click here and see what changed. From before, there was an element here, and now there's not. Okay, so same thing if I add something. Okay, I can add one element. If you're wondering how I did that, Shift, Alt, and then down arrow or up arrow, you can just clone your elements. Okay, so when you add something, you get some green line here. So you can see where it was. There was an empty space here, and then you added an element. Okay, so you can keep track of changes. And also afterwards, after the fact, from GitHub, you can see this diff later on. Okay, so when you need to know what happened, what was there before, you just do it. So let me do it this another way. So if I have to stage something, I can click the plus here, or I can just write git add and the name of the file, which is the same thing. Okay, so now I've added it, and as you can see, it went to the state changed. Okay, so I have to do a commit, git commit -m, which stands for message, pushing changes in index.html. Okay, so I've created a commit. As you can see, now this disappears. It's the same thing. So you can choose which way you prefer, and then we can just do git push. And just like that, we updated our remote repository. Okay, so right now I can lose my computer. My house can be burning down, which I don't care because everything is on the cloud right now. Okay. All right. So as I mentioned, you can always go here. So you can see here we are in the homepage of our repository, and you can click on the commits, and you can see what changed in every moment in time. So the same way as you saw before, here is going to tell us what changed. So this element went away, and we added another one here. Okay. All clear? The same way also the first one. Okay, so everything that you commit and push will be displayed here. So you can be sure, and there are also ways in which you can go back to a particular snapshot. Okay, this is why this is very important. Okay, so it's actually an actual time machine if you think about that. Okay, any question, guys and girls, of course?
Yeah, I was a little bit lost in the configuration. And for example, when I did git config the global there, and then, well, I did all of that, but in the git remote at origin and git remote, it then it doesn't understand what -u does mean. Like,
Okay.
unknown switch, it says error unknown switch u, for example.
You know, the command for git remote is just git remote at origin and the link. There are no -u. The -u is in the git push command. The first time that you do a git push, you need to specify the upstream, which is something more complicated to just say, I want to always push to my origin main right now. Okay, so you tell your repository that you want always to push by default in the main branch, and that after that you can just do a git push without anything else. Okay, but I will show you another way in which you can initialize a repository if that is easier to you, instead of doing git init and then add remote. There are an easy way to do that. So let me just go here. I can create another test repository. Okay, I can create this, and this is going to be the same thing, guys. So once it gets created, you can either initialize it, do your first commit, and then attach the origin, or you can just copy this, and you can do it here by clicking this one. Then you go in another folder. Let me open a new window. You know, you also have a terminal on your machine. So let me just create another folder. I can call this test. And from here, if I open with code and I open my terminal, I can always do a git clone and use my link to the newly created repository. Okay, so as you can see, it will clone it. You'll have the folder of git folder inside, and it's basically the same thing. Okay, so after that, it's already connected. So for me, it's just a quicker way to do the same thing. Okay, just a git clone, and then you can do the normal push. Okay, of course, commit, push, and the usual stuff. Okay, so just remind yourself that you have two ways to do the same thing. Okay, so let me just delete this that we don't need. Delete this. Okay. Okay, let me see the chat. What is the essence of staging in Git? Do you use target for anything else or just for, okay, there are two different questions. What's the essence of staging? You can, maybe you want to commit a part of your code, but not everything that you're working on right now. So you just stage a part of your modifications, okay? To delay at a later point in time the rest of the modifications, okay? So yeah, it's not really simple to do it right now, but you know, if you want to experiment, you can have a visual representation, a visual program to do all the Git stuff, and it's called GitHub Desktop. There are many other things that you can use. This is the simplest one for beginners, and you have a visual representation of pulling, creating commits, push, changing branches. It's still basic, okay? You know, professional will not use this. There are some other things like Git fork or Git kraken, but for the beginners, I think it's best GitHub Desktop because it's very on point, right on point on what you need to do. And once you get comfortable, you can switch to another more professional one, which you can see different tracks, which are different branches. Okay, so this is the basic idea behind it. As you can see, it looks complicated, but if you go step by step, it will not be so much. Okay, so but the idea is I want to just change the color of some portion of my project, but I'm still working on something else. I will stage only the change for the color change and not, therefore I'm only committing that, not the whole other things. Okay. So do you use target for anything else or just for blank? Basically just for blank to open in a new window most of the times. Okay. Any questions? Okay, let me go back to the slides. Okay, so the usual thing, if you didn't do it already, just do it. Okay, so what about CSS? So CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheet. This means that there are a particular set of rules that lets the browser decide in case of conflict which rule to apply. So by the name cascading, it gives you an idea, which is that everything that comes last will have precedence, will be more powerful than something written before, given the same set of specificity. The rule specificity is something else, but we'll get to it. Just know that everything works from the top to bottom. So everything that comes last will have, by default, the precedence. This is why it's called cascading style sheet. Okay. So defines a set of rules of how the DOM is translated into visual form. So everything that you want to be displayed needs to be written in CSS somehow. So cascading style rules describe the priority of how the styles are rendered on the page. So the word priority is key here. So, and we are going to see how this goes into play. Okay, so there are some things that gives our CSS rule more power over another rule. It depends on few factors. Okay, so the rule can be as simple as defining color sizes, fonts, and applying traditional design concepts like contrast, alignment, and proximity. So basically, whenever we want to transition from our blank page with text, with basic stuff, we need to use CSS in some way. Okay. So other than that, the new CSS 3 is going to give us the ability to also add native animations, which is really cool. So transition animation and being able to make the website responsive, which means that it will scale from desktop to mobile to tablets with ease. So responsive doesn't mean that the site will respond something to us. It just means that it will change given the different device which we are in. Okay, and you can also manipulate that viewport very easily with our inspector. So as you can see here, if I shrink this, or I can emulate a device, I can go to pixel. Usually you need to also refresh. As you can see, the website is responsive because it's changing. So some things can change given the different viewport, and also on the fly, as you can see, something animated there. So we need to make sure that our website is never breaking and always make everything visible and not be hidden outside of the viewport, for example. That can happen if you use just fixed amount of width in your page and not a responsive approach. So this is why being responsive is really a must in 2021 at least. So the rules can be as simple as defining color, size, and apply. Okay, so this we covered. And so in order to do something like this, of course, some CSS should be written. As you can see, this is the basic way in which we can add some CSS in our page inside of the head and using the style tag. Okay, but we can also have two other ways to do that. So the first one is with an inline style, which is the most specific one. So this inline style will always win from a CSS written in a style tag or a CSS file. So be mindful of that. Try to never use the inline style if you can. Okay, if you have another option, just use the normal style or just define your CSS in the CSS file. But because, yeah, this is has a more specificity rather than a normal CSS rule. Therefore, if you try to overwrite it, you'll get in trouble. There is one way in which you can win, but if you can, always, at least in the beginning, just write a style tag and put all the CSS in there. You can also reference an external file, which is a tidier way to structure your file. So only one file that will contain all your CSS rules. Okay, but yeah, for instance, we should experiment with the inline to just see. Let me close some useless thing. Okay, let's go back here. So as you can see, I already did that. I use this to just give both the elements a display inline property, but I could have do it with a style tag referencing all the paragraphs in the page. Okay, so this is a basic selector. If you write P like that, we are looking for a generic P tag, paragraph tag. Okay, so selector specificity 001. This means that this is not very specific. Okay, so the number on the left is the most specific one, is for the ID, which we're going to talk about in the next lesson. But if this number is higher on the part on the left, this means that most likely this rule will win. Okay, and we're going to see how to improve this specificity over time. Okay, so if I move this rule from the inline style to here, oops, let me do it. Okay, I'm going to give both the elements the same rule without the need of manually attaching that to both of them. And you can see the benefit in there, right? So nothing changed in them. They are both still a display inline given this CSS rule that we written in the head. Okay. So nothing changed, but as you can see, you can start to look at why this is a more convenient approach, because with just one selector, you basically did the work of having two. And if you have to modify one or both of them, or imagine you having 20 p tag that needs to be of display in line, okay? You would have to just copy the property to each one of them. In this way, we are just targeting all the paragraphs in our page, in a very convenient way, okay? All right. So yeah, we can now target perhaps the unordered list to add a background, for example. I just need to specify UL, not in caps, of course, and a background color, which can be gray at the moment, or let's make it more fun. Teal, I like teal. Okay, so with just one rule, I was able to apply my background color to my unordered list. Okay, so one really cool thing that we can do, we can close the terminal for now, is to just make this live. This means that I don't have to refresh every time I make a change, and it's done via the live server package. So if you can click in this extension panel here and look for live server, it will give you this option here. You just need to go here and install it, and then you can open with live server. Okay, so now you can see there's an IP here because we have a working server under the hood instead of this absolute path here. Okay, so every time I make a change here, if I change this to red and save, I can see it right away. Okay, wonderful. All right. So yeah, as we mentioned, HTML tags can also have, some of them also have attributes. So as this href here and target are attributes onto the anchor tag. Also other elements have attributes. So for example, an image, in order to work, and this is maybe the first auto-closing tag that you'll see. Images are not wrapping anything. So they are auto-closed like that with a slash before the closing bracket. And this, in order to function, need to have an SRC, which stands for source, in order to tell the image which is the actual image to be displayed. So let me grab an image for you, and I will put it in our project. So let me grab this logo here, and let me go here, here, and just place it here. Okay, let's rename this to be just logo for brevity. Okay, so now I should be able to just reference logo. As you can see, also VS Code is suggesting me that. So let's see. If I go back here, I can see an image right away. Okay, so since the other elements are of type inline, the image was displayed right next to it, because by default, images are of type inline, even if it's not specified. Okay, as you can see, an image will just take enough space. In this case, if we had a bigger image, we would have need to specify an actual width. Otherwise, it will be very, very big. Okay. So the second argument that we can add to images is the width and the height. Okay, we can modify this even without CSS, just because this is the way in which images work. I can have 50 and 50, which is really small, as you can see. I can change this to be higher than the width, which results in stretching. Okay, so it's always a good practice to just use one and not both, because the second one will be just scaled proportionately. Okay, so this property comes from the attribute style, and just because it's an image, this will work like that. So this height and width only work in the context of the image tag. Okay, but yeah, this time we can, if you prefer, we can specify this in here. By just using the image selector, CSS selector, we can specify the height to be 150 pixel. Maybe you noticed that in the attributes it wasn't needed, but that's just how it worked. You can also use pixels here, but it's just not needed, okay? So we will have the same result, but right now, as you can see, it's not from the image attribute anymore, but it's from the CSS. So in here, we can also add a border if we like. Border needs the width of the border, and the type of the border can be solid, can be dotted, can be dashed, and also the color. Let's use this one. Okay, a little border appeared. Let's make this bigger so you can see. And just like that, we're able to modify some things. We can also round the corners with a border radius property. Let's do it like that. And just like that, very simply, we were able to modify our image. And from the inspector, you can always check what if we don't have those properties at all times. But the modification that you do here are not reflected on your file. So let's never forget that if you change something in here, you need to remember to transport this property also in your file, because if I refresh, I'll lose everything I did in the inspector. The inspector is meant to be used just for the sake of try something out really quick and see the result right away without having to do like that to switch applications. So if I want to change this color and want to see how this stands next to my image, I can use the inspector to do that. But then I need to copy my property. Otherwise, I will lose it. Maybe you spend so much time. And yeah, this is how you can choose a color by clicking this color square here. And you can change the color like that. And the change is reflected right away. So if I make this bigger, you can see it better. Okay. And yeah, this is when the inspector is meant to be used to do some stuff like that. Okay. But yeah, if I forget to save or to copy this thing, I can just, yeah, if I modify something, I can always copy it from here and transport it here. Okay, maybe the other property wasn't needed, but yeah, just to show you. Okay. All right. I think this is the perfect time for a break. What do you think? Let me see the chat real quick. What if you define a style rule for all paragraphs, but want to have only one paragraph with a different style? Yeah, so that's when the specificity of your selector comes in at play. You know, we can be very, very specific, and we're going to see in a few moments how to do that. But yeah, we can be more specific. Right now, we are just being generic on the tag name. So you can imagine this being applied to every element with this name in the tag. Okay, so we are actually applying to all the URLs in our page, to all our images, which is not very convenient, as you may imagine. Okay, so let's do a quick break. Let's say 10 minutes. And we're going to get back to it right away. So let's see each other at 7:45. All right. See you soon, guys.
Okay, thanks.
Bye. See you in a bit. Let me just resume the recording. Okay, you did it already. Perfect. Okay, let me share the screen again. Share, share, share. Okay. So where were we? So as you can see, green line was created here because we made some modification, and VS Code knows about that. And this is its way to tell us, hey, you have something that you didn't commit already. And basically it's this part here. And if we can use the minimap as well to orient ourselves, as you can see, that is reflected also here. So when the file gets so big, I find it very useful to navigate with my minimap here. Okay, because maybe you touch something and you did it before committing, so you want to check it once again. You just scroll down at the right position. Okay, so what did we do before the break was to just see that some tags also have attributes. So an attribute is just something that you add in between the opening of the tag and before the closure. Okay, so even in the case of my anchor tag here, as you can see, the closure is actually this one at the bottom. I don't know why it decided to split it like that, but if that helps you to be seen like that. So the closure of the tag itself is this one here. So everything that you place in between the open bracket and the closing bracket of the opening of the A tag is called an attribute. Okay, so this work as to understand where to put the user, where to link the user to. And in the case of images, we have also the alt attribute, which is really useful in case the image doesn't load. This is the message that the user gets displayed, or the screen reader for visually impaired users will read to the user. Okay. So
could you zoom in a little bit, please?
Oh, yeah, sure. Is it better like that?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So yeah, as I was mentioning, this alt serves two purposes also for the accessibility, which is another topic which is really important in web development, to being able to do things in a way which is not a problem for visually impaired people that needs to use screen readers, people that use only the tab button on the keyboard without a mouse to navigate your website. And also the visually impaired people, maybe they're not completely blind, but they need to see stuff and text with enough contrast. So this is something really important, which it's better not to overlook, because even if the user is not visually impaired, a button, let's try that. Let's create a button with a tag button and the text inside and a button. Okay, so by default, it will be completely ugly. Let's see, where are we here? Okay, so yeah, I'm a button is there. Let me just place it at the bottom. Okay, so after everything, I'll place my button here. So yeah, we can change this, you can see how huge is the default styling of buttons. But yeah, we can always change this. Background, color, let's use teal again. And you see, just like that, the contrast is less than before. So maybe we want to change the color to white, and this is a little bit better. We can add padding, which we're going to talk in a second. Okay, but yeah, you need to be aware that it needs to have, you see, contrast ratio it's like that. It's a new thing. I used to use some external tools to tell me if the contrast is enough. And if you see the tick, it's probably enough. Okay, but if you go down, as you can see, contrast ratio, I believe it needs to be above 180. There are many steps, but yeah. So as you can see, believe me, probably 2 or 1.8 is the minimum. 3 maybe, yeah. But as you can see, even if the person is not visually impaired, giving good contrast in your user interface will ensure that you give a pleasant experience to the user. Because even if the user can see, but you give it a button like that, it will get angry and frustrated. Okay, so our job is to ease the fruition of our website to the user, not to make him angry or frustrated. And that will convert better in terms of money. And that is something really important if you want to pursue this career. Okay, so always bear in mind that if you have text over something else, can be an image or a button, you need to ensure enough legibility and contrast. Okay, so usually if you can, just don't deviate too much to the complete white if your background is dark and the other way around. So if the button is light gray, it cannot be white. You need to switch and go in the other direction. Okay. But yeah, now you have also this handy tool here. Okay. So there are two ways in which we can create buttons. This is the most used one. In my opinion, it's the most pretty also. But in the context of a form, you can see something like that. Input type, and this is an attribute, button, okay? With a value, which is the text that goes inside, as we did here by wrapping it in case of an input, which is also an auto-closing tag. I'm an input button, okay? This is the other way to create a button, okay? So they look the same, but they are made by different elements. This is usually meant to go inside of a form. So a form is another legacy component, which is still used, not pretty, not very conveniently and easy to use, but it's there. So you need to know that it's there. So we also have input type, and we can have, so an input is just an area in which the user can input some text, in this case, email, and this will come with a basic validation. So it will look if there's an @ symbol inside of what you're writing. So this is why specifying the type is useful, but also for other number of things. There can be a type number, type, let's see, data time local, which is really cool. Let's see. So we have a bunch of inputs here. This one is, let me just turn off this emulation. So you can see in this case, we have little arrows. Maybe you cannot see, let me zoom in. Let's inspect this. So in any moment, you can just right click onto an element and inspect, and the inspector will position you exactly onto that element. So in this case, as you can see, I wanted to know which one was this, and it's the email type. Okay. So in the case of type number, you can only type numbers, but not letters, except E one time, because mathematical notation, you can use the E for huge numbers. And in the local datetime, you can have this handy pop up with the calendar and the time if you need. Okay. So in the context of a form, if you have a button inside, you can, in the future, whenever you are ready to do that, send some data to the server. Okay. But since this is an ancient element, the default behavior is to refresh the page. Maybe we are not seeing it right now, but that is the default behavior of the button. Just to know this thing here. Okay, so let's go back to the slides. Let's see what we're missing. So yeah, we saw how to define styles. We can add the style right onto the element, and maybe I can do it on one element here. So style is an attribute as well, okay, as the other ones. If I change the background color only to the email to be red, maybe, we can see that in our page, only the red one, sorry, only the email gets the red background because we specified an attribute here, an attribute of style, but not the other ones. Okay, but yeah, I advise you to stay away from using inline styles because A, they're not very maintainable. It's really a risky approach because if you need more elements, let's say I want to use inline styles for all my inputs to be the same color, that is not really convenient. Let's just use a CSS rule to do that. You can just specify one rule for every input or everyone except type button, for example, and just like that. But yeah, if you have many styles, many inline styles, that is going to be painful to maintain. If maybe your client comes back and say, I don't really like that color, you need to go in and change manually for all those inputs the color. But yeah, there are ways in VS Code in which you can change something for multiple elements. So by default, with the Alt key, you can create multiple cursors. Okay, so this is something that will ease your changes whenever you need to do some changes in your file, right? You can select a portion of your element, and as you can see, the same other elements kind of lights up, and with Command or Control D of day, you can select the next one, okay, one by one. Or you can just do Command Control F, and by opening this one here, you can replace this part. You can find this part of the text here. Oops. If I, select this part here, and I want to change everyone to something else, like that, it will change in this file for the whole occurrences, okay? Can be useful very much, so bear that in mind, but you need to open this panel here, okay? So, it's not very convenient to do it here, I agree. Okay, so let me see what else we can see. So, okay, so some styling examples. We saw color, we saw background color. So color is to set the text color to something. The background is for the background, as the name suggests. Then we have margin, we have font properties, border, stuff like that. And this can be your reference. And MDN is the developer Mozilla documentation, which is the best out there. You can find many of them, but MDN docs are the best, in my opinion. And here you can find every possible properties, and there are plenty of them, okay? So whenever in doubt, just reach here and look for the properties that you want. As you can see, there are many ways in which you can apply a color, and we're going to see in a moment. And yeah, you can see other stuff here. So whenever in doubt, whenever you don't know how to use something, and many of them you don't need to worry about. You'll see some of them you are going to use over and over, other ones not so much. So don't worry about knowing every single one of them, because they're not required, okay? Not right away. Every time you need to do something more, you just reference the guide or the documentation. So that is the usual approach of a web developer, okay? Don't think like you need to know everything, and also you're going to forget many things, and that's completely expected and normal. That's why we have so many documentation around the web, and also something called like Stack Overflow, in which developers can share knowledge, and you're going to find yourself in that place many times in your career, okay? So let me see the chat if you have any questions. So I think I lost a few of them before. Let's see. Where are we? So do you advise learning CSS frameworks like Bootstrap and Sass? Of course. If we have time, we're going to see tomorrow, not tomorrow, Friday, about Bootstrap. Sass is maybe an advanced topic. Don't think we are going to cover it, but yeah, it's definitely a good thing to learn. So the code for mobile or desktop is the same, right? Yeah. And when you hear about developing mobile first, it's a concept that wants you to think about how your layout is displayed first on mobile and narrow devices before the desktop ones. I can agree, but not always. I think the desktop layout is much more difficult, and then everything scales down to be stacked one upon each other, the elements. So I mean, it depends on which is your preferred approach. But if you think about that, a page without any structural styling is responsive by default. As you can see, we never have something going out of our viewport, except of course when something cannot scale down like that. But for the text, as you can see, pretty much is always in the viewport. So we can consider not having CSS already a responsive website in a way, okay? So the more you add, the more you need to be aware of what you're doing and how this will scale for mobiles devices, okay? So for example, if I apply a particular fixed amount of pixel here, at some point, let's say even more, at some point this is going to overflow behind or outside of our viewport. So since we apply the fixed width to our first div, this will never scale down, which was the default behavior if we didn't do that, okay? So everything that you add, and you'll see this in the future with Bootstrap, Bootstrap will ease this process for us. It will give us so many tools to just make our website responsive out of the box without worrying too much about changing this when the viewport is narrower than this 460 pixels, okay? But the concept is, by default, a layout is already responsive, okay? Just think about that. Okay, let me see if we have another question. Can you share the lines or the slides in the end? Yes, of course. Okay, yeah, the link for the CSS reference. You know, if you type ndn or developer mozilla.org and you go.
I sent it, no worries.
Okay. Thank you, Alexia. But yeah, this is like your temple of knowledge. Everything that you need to know for those technologies, at least, you can find a very, very good documentation in MDN. Okay, let's move on. And so here we are at the box model. Okay, let's see. So we can consider all DOM elements like boxes, as we said. Every box is made by the content, the padding, the border, and the margin. So this is actually our tools in order to position our content in some way or the other, okay? But yeah, just know that every element in the page is constructed with this box model, and we saw this here. So it's always there, even if you don't think about him, he's thinking about you. Okay, so at the moment, this is the representation of the box model. If we had any margin, any border or padding, it will be highlighted. Let's, for example, you know, if I go in the border gets highlighted. I hope you can see it because it's yellow. Maybe through the video it's not so visible. But yeah, there's also a little bit of padding, as you can see. That green line inside here is lighting up. And of course, the inner box is the content. So if you think about that, our content has its own box, then it's wrapped in our first element, which is the padding. And then we have a border and then a margin. This is our tool in order to space elements one next to each other or to space the content inside of its container. Okay, what I mean by that. So we know that we can add margin, borders, and padding. And we can add a different margin to the left than it's on the right, and so on and so forth, okay? We can divide that declaration in order to have only, let's say, I want to space my image only at the left, so I can use margin left, 20 pixel, and you can see it moving, okay? So if I hover with my image selected and I hover this box model in the margin, as you can see, there is already a number here, but not on the other sides. And if I just hover it, it's going to highlight for me the place in which the margin takes place. Okay, so we can add margin all around by only specifying margin here. And as you can see, the margin will be all around. And we can overwrite one side, maybe margin left. I want 30 pixel, but everything else needs to stay at 70. So as you can see, the margin left, it gets overwritten. Because as we said, cascading style sheets work in a way from top to bottom. So the last property will override the previous if it's the same. Okay, so the last thing that you write is more powerful on the previous. That is the idea. Okay, but we can also add padding to our element, but yeah, image is not the best case scenario. Let's try with this div here. Let's add some margin, let's say 10 pixel. As you can see, it moved, and if I hover, I can see this orange border, which is actually the margin. And we can have padding, if I am able to, padding 20 pixel, okay? So the double of the margin, okay? And we can also have a border. Border 3 pixels, solid red. Okay. So if I hover over here, or the element like that, I can see all 3 elements. So the margin is outside. As you can see, it's the first element outside, always. The border is in the middle from the margin, between the margin and the padding. And the padding is the last element before the content itself, which is displayed blue. So every element, every single one, has this box model, right? So even the H1 has its own box model. If I copy this to this element here, I get the same result, okay? Even him will have now margin, border, and padding, okay? And this is very convenient if you want to style, if you want a little breathing area around your content, you use padding to do that. As you can see, without the padding, my border will touch my content, so to speak, okay? So this is our tools to position elements. It's just one way to position elements, actually, but yeah, in order to have these spacings, we always use margins to have a space outside of our box, and padding is that area inside of our element. Okay, if we have, let's see here, we had 2 paragraphs, I think, that were next to each other. So yeah, this is an inline element, and this one is another one. Let me see here. I don't get why it's displaying so big. The image is here. Let me see. Okay, but yeah, strange behavior, but let's not worry too much about this. So even this one here, if I want to space this out from the next paragraph, I can give this a margin right. Yeah, margin right. Since they are of type inline, they will touch each other, but if that's not what I want, I can always space them out, okay? And this can vary, okay? Okay, so yeah, something like that, because every element has is responding to the box model, all right? So let me see if I move this away. Okay, that's more like it. Okay, right? So if you think like that, every element can be moved around. Maybe I want to align this to this border on the top. I can use, in this case, since we don't have any background color, I can use either one of them. But usually you want to use margins to make some changes from outside your element. If you want to move your content from inside of your box, you use padding. So from outside margin, from inside padding. So let me just move this to the right. So margin left needs to have, let's say, something like that, okay? But I want to show you a cool thing about this box model. So right now, let me just grab this here. So how to calculate the size? Given how it works by default, consider having margin 5 pixels, padding 10 pixels, and a border of 5, and an internal width of 250 pixels and a height of 150. The calculated width will be the content size plus double the padding, because you have 1 on each side, so 2 of them in the y-axis and 2 of them in the x-axis, double the border and double the margin. So you get this number here. So you need to consider all these elements combined, okay? And same thing for the height. But nowadays, even Bootstrap will reset the box sizing. So from where we start to consider those units. So nowadays, we don't consider padding anymore. And this is because otherwise, so we use padding to manipulate or space our content from the inside of our box, as I said, but that was not completely true before, because nowadays we move the content box to be outside of the padding. So the padding will be considered inside of the box. So therefore, the units that we add to the padding will not add up to the total width of our element. I hope this makes sense, but let's see that in practice. So I'm going to create a class of box. And yeah, this is a class selector with a dot before. So a class selector we can use for multiple elements, and the ID selector is just for one, but we're going to see about that, don't worry. Let me just create one quick class selector for our divs. So let's create those divs. So div class, it's an attribute which will make us able to add some style to multiple same elements. So let's say this is a class box. So if I want to style a rule for it in the style tag, I need to use the dot. But when I use it, I just use the name instead of the class attribute. Okay. So I want two elements equal, and then I want this to be red and this one to be green. Okay. Just to show you, and maybe I want to wrap everything in a div, just for the sake of trying something out. Okay, so my box needs to be width 150 pixels, height the same. Okay, let me think what I need. Yeah, display, I need to change the display from block to inline block. Okay, the inline will not have width and height. So if you want an element to not take the whole space, but also have width and height, you need to use this hybrid property, which is inline block. Okay, so let's see how they look. Maybe I need some content there. Box number 1, let's say, box 1 and box 2. Okay. So let's see, yeah, we have box 1 and box 2. We don't have the color yet because we need to create the rule to define that this one will give the div a background color of red and this one background color of green. So let's create this red background color, red, and green background color of green, obviously. Okay, right. So as you can see, yeah, we get two boxes of equal width and height. Okay, because that is what we specified in the style rules, right? But we also added a red in the first one and a green to differentiate the background color. I could have used an inline style to do the same in this case, just in this case. Okay, but as we said, let's try to avoid using inline styles. Therefore, I created class rules. So we can use this div, maybe we can give this another class, or we can use the inline style just to space this out a little bit. I don't want to confuse it with too much classes, so let's do a style just in this case. Margin top, just to space this out, let's say 48 pixels. Okay, live server works. Okay, maybe I want to add padding to both of the boxes, right? So padding, let's say 20 pixels. Okay, so everything is fine until we want perhaps to have the boxes to have each one taking the 50% of the space of the total available space. Okay, so let's do that. Let's change this to be 50%. I know there are some tricks here, but let me see. So right now, the width is not 50% anymore, but it's 50% plus 20 pixels. That's why the box will fall behind. And even if I decrease this a little bit, even with 44, we don't get it. But if I take out the padding, you can see them stacking next to each other. That's because the padding is actually right now considered to add to the total width, as we mentioned before. Okay, and that is not something that we want usually. We want to be able to use padding without padding to push and to make the box grow. Okay, and this is the current behavior and current standard to move the content box, or what is considered content, from the content itself to the padding, because right now we add the width to the padding, to the border, to the margin. We want only border or only margin to push outside. Okay, so we want to actually consider border and padding inside of the content. How do we do that? So if you look into the documentation of Bootstrap, you'll see that by default they do some resets of the default properties that the user agent gives to the document. Okay, so that is called box sizing. Box sizing, you can see we can move it to content box, border box. Okay, in this case, we want to move it to the border box. And just like that, only the first element, not the second one, we are ignoring the padding in the overall calculation of width and height. So padding right now is pushing the content inward, not adding to the total width and the total height. And this is really important because padding is the only way that we have to space the content inside of our box. And if you want something that resembles 50-50, one box to the left and one to the right, we want to apply to both of them this reset. So we can go and have something really close to 50%. Okay, it's not working right now with 50 because legacy code, there's a little thing going on. So let me see how I can show it to you. Even if they stay next to each other, you can see this little white border here. This is just how inline block work, just adding that for no reason. So yeah, we are going to see Flex, which is the new way in which we can create a layout like that, split it in the middle. But yeah, just bear with me. I'm just resetting 2 pixels in order to get rid of that. And we should be able now to have 50-50, okay? But without this border box, you can see one element pushing the other one because padding is adding to the total width. Okay, I know this doesn't make sense in the beginning, but trust me, padding is very, very useful if we want to position an element inside of a particular content box like that. So in theory, if I wanted, I could have spaced that a little bit downward with padding top, 50 pixel, because we want to do something like that. But as you can see, this is not the best way. But just bear in mind that we need a way which padding can push the content inward and not adding to the total width. So let's try with the other direction, left, for example. Okay, so that's more like it. But yeah, we are going to see a more modern way to do these things with ease. Okay. So this is how the box model works. Any question like that? Yeah. I've seen that people create another file beside index.html for CSS. Do you like it? Yeah, of course. Let's do it right now. We can always reference some CSS, some outside CSS. So styles.css or styles. Okay, so if I move everything that I wrote in here, we can have a separate file which is tidier. But when you have a small file, you can do this. That's no problem. But we can link something with the attributes rel, style sheet, and href to find the file right next to my index.html. I can reference it like that. Okay, so nothing should be going away. It's because I didn't save. Okay, so we got the same styling even from an outside file. So yeah, this is a tidier way to organize your files, just having an external style sheet. Okay, so yeah, separating the concerns, they say. So HTML should only have those tags, and everything about the styles should go in a separate file, ideally. But yeah, it's not wrong. It's just a better practice. Okay, let's see. Any other question, guys? All right, let me go back to the slides. So yeah, we talked about this. So sizes, oh yeah, another great topic. So pixels are an absolute size, okay? It's an absolute value, as we saw before when I specified a width, an absolute size width for my container. We created problems in a particular instance. But yeah, in case you want to create a more modular layout, though there are other relative units, which are relative to the parent size in case of EM units, and relative to the main HTML tag size in case of the REM units, which is root element for short. Okay, so yeah, we can decide to use pixels, and bear in mind that fonts are never scalable, so they always have some sort of absolute size. But there are ways in which you can change the font size given the different device or viewport size. Okay, but yeah, we can create something that just by changing one will change all the children size relatively. Okay, so the EM unit will take in consideration the immediate parent, the nearest parent font size. Okay, so let's try to do something like that. So in this case, I have the nearest parent, which is this one. I can, just for being very, very, comprehensible, I will exactly want this element to have a font size, let's say of 20 pixels, okay? So yeah, there are something that, let's see, maybe we have a slide for that. Inheritance. So something like color or font size gets inherited from parent to the children, okay? But other rules don't do that. So doesn't do that. Like border, for example, the paragraph inside doesn't get that pixel border inherited from the parent. But if you specify a color in a parent, every children will get that color if not specified otherwise. Same thing for the font size. Font size gets inherited. Okay, so that is why I wanted to show you this. So by default, the font size is 16 pixels. Let's make this obvious, like 36 pixels. So our H1, H2, and H6 should change, but let's see, maybe they have that default styling, but yeah, they changed. So given the fact that we have a font size here, this got bigger because, they specified the font size as EMs. So the H1 will be 2 times the size of the parent. The H2 will have 1.5. And so they scale accordingly and proportionally. If I change this here to be 28, all 3 of them and even the paragraphs will get something different. The paragraphs is 1 EM, by default 16, but we change the parent, so EM will take in consideration the nearest parent, even though we can specify here the font size to be 8 pixels, only the outside elements receive that, but not those inside this element here. You see, with the blue overlay, these elements are inheriting the font structure from this parent here. But things changes if we change the unit from EM to REM. But yeah, we are dealing with default styling here. Let me just create or add to this selector a particular font size with REM, because by default it already has the font size. Okay, so yeah, here in the p tag, let's say we want the font size of both of them to be, let's say, 3 EMs, for instance, only to see the difference. Okay, so it's going to be 3 times to 28. And we can always inspect this. And if you're always dubious of who's giving them some properties, you can switch to this computed tab, which will reveal every property applied to this specific element. And you can track back which one is giving those resemblance, okay? So in this case, we can see that we have this font size attribute here inherited from div. You can always track back the rules, the cascading rules from the computed tab. So it's 3 times, which is 84 pixels, 28. Okay, but things changes if we change this EM to be REM. Now we are referencing the root element no matter what. Okay, so it will be a milder 48 pixel because our root element by default is 16. Believe me, if we change the HTML to font size 30 pixels, this will be picked up by the REM. But usually it will always stay at 16 pixels, and REM are a safer way, in my opinion, as an approach, a modular approach. Because, yeah, if you think about, maybe it's too advanced of a topic, but a list, if we have a font size here of 2EM, and also list items have font size 2EM, those 2 EMs will add up one upon each other. So yeah, in this case, we don't have a wrapping div. It's not a perfect example, but since this list item, so the UL will get the 2 times the font size of a hypothetical wrapping div, and the list item is getting, the double of the double. Okay, maybe is that what you want, but not in all cases. Okay. So if you want to create an element that changes maybe the padding size according to the font size, maybe you want to create something that do that, you can always add a padding with EMs. Okay, so padding left, let's say to EM. And in this case, you only have to care about changing the font size of the parent element to adjust, let's say, also this padding here. Okay. Oh yeah, I misspelled this one. And let's see. Padding left to EM, but yeah, font size. Yeah, not working as expected, but yeah, because that had a font size like that. But yeah, in this case, you can think in a sort of a modular way, okay? Everything that you specify in EMs will change according to the parent font size. Just remember that it's a unit that looking about the font size of the parent in the case of EM. With REM is just taking in consideration the default 16 if you don't specify anything different. Okay, so yeah, this looks like a little bit of a mess. Yeah. Any question, guys? Right now.
Hi, Stefano. Could you
Hello.
just quickly summarize the maybe 3 main points that you're trying to make about padding? I found it kind of got slightly confusing at a certain point in time.
Yeah,
if you could just short and sweet, maybe in like a couple sentences, would be awesome.
All right. So, we always have a box to take in consideration, which each element that we add to the page. If you want to space your elements inward, use padding. If you want to space the elements, those 2 boxes, for example, you want to space those out to create a space between them, then you use margin. Okay, margin, bottom, 2 rems. Let's start using rems right now. Okay, so if you want to space element outside, you use margin. If you want to create, to move the content inside of your box, and you can see the box because it's red, then you use the padding. So padding all around 3 rems. You see, in this case, the box gets bigger because we don't have the box size in border box. But usually the padding, the use of the padding is to just space the element inside. You see, the content shrinks in favor of the padding because we are considering the padding inside of the content right now. But margin operates from outside, okay? Gotcha. So yeah, it's a little bit abstract right now, but once you start applying this to a more specific thing or adding images, you can see that maybe this red represents an image, and you want to space or position this element exactly with this amount of space from top and left, for example, then you know that you have to use the padding to do that. If you want to have a white space before the next content to appear, you want to use the margin, okay?
Okay.
And this applies to everything. I can select this element here. I want to make sure that they don't touch like that right now. Margin bottom, 3 rems, I create some space. Same thing, but remember, using margin to space things, it's a little bit dangerous. And even in the future, when you'll know how to create columns and rows, you need to, take in consideration the fact that margin will push elements around. So even you can have negative margin and create all sorts of problems, but can be dangerous. So use it sparingly, only if you know what you're doing.
Okay. Thank you, Stefano.
The whole idea is when you want to operate inward in your content, use padding. When you want to space that content from outside, use margins. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Very welcome. Okay, let's see what we need to do also. So colors in CSS. Well, fun topic. Okay, so let's go here. We can see that we have some predefined color names to look at. I rarely use this, but can be useful if you want to do something like that. There are other frameworks that give you another set of predefined colors, but they are not that ugly. Light green and light sea green can work well together, maybe in some ways. You can combine them. Okay, so this is the first way in which we can add color. Let's get this antique white. Okay, so I want to change this background to be antique white, and it's really very easy. Okay, so there are things, there are predefined names that you can use. Okay, but as I showed you already, we have this useful panel in which we can modify the color. So you can have a starting point, which can be one of those predefined colors, and then move this around, and then take this reference and update your file, for example. Okay, I usually operate like that. So apart from named color, we have other ways of defining it. So this is a hexadecimal number, which is exactly that color that you want, but it can be represented as an RGB color, which stands for red, green, and blue, because this is how your monitor is operating. You have 3 pixels, red, green, and blue, that combine together at a different rate, produce the color that you see. Okay, by modifying the amount of red, the amount of green, and the amount of blue, you're going to be able to create different colors. But of course, you don't have to be a genius to invent that. You can just use the color picker. But the fun thing and the very useful way in which you can use these RGBs is with also the alpha channel. So if I want to use the alpha channel, I can see they updated the syntax that usually was divided by commas. I can see now they changed this a little bit, but as you can see, also the legacy one works. Okay, probably it was better the other way. It's a more modern way, maybe. Okay, but the first 3 are always RGB. The last one is the alpha channel, in which is the transparency. Okay, so it can look like a lighter color because the background is white, but this changes if we change the body to have a background of black. Okay, so this is not so white anymore because this is transparent. Okay, this is how the alpha channel works. Okay, but apart from the RGB, we also have HSLA. So hue, saturation, lightness, and alpha channel again. So this is more convenient if you want to just change the lightness of a color, because this fall off as a curve, as you can see here, is more like the human will perceive this color change in the shadow. Okay, it will go towards the more saturation level, but this part here is not very realistic. So it knows this already, and it will fall off in a curve. So given a particular color that we start from, and we want just to make this lighter a little bit, we can just use the HSL. Then maybe we need the hexadecimal. We can always convert this with this tool, okay? So three main ways plus the named color by default, okay? You can choose which one suits you the best. You can always use the hexadecimal and, change something from here. You can even use the color picker, get the color or the other one, and then grab this entity here. And, you can always inspect any website, and if you get to inspect the button, you get the color as well from every website that you can think of. I can even take the color of the shirt with a picker. By default, is already triggered. Okay, so yeah, it's a really great thing to pick a color from the image, which gives the button the sense that it's part of the same family. Okay. All right. But yeah, of course, if you want to make this popping out effect, you need to something that is more flashy. Okay. So yeah, three main ways plus the named color that you can find a reference somewhere. But yeah, if you're using frameworks or other, you need to reference those documentation. Usually you always get, with Bootstrap, some default colors. You can override them. You can start from one and create your own, which is very fun for me. So yeah, oops. I usually do this. I start from somewhere, and then I know I want something more like that, for example, or I want to just grab it and augment the lightness. Maybe I want, I want to have a border, which will be part of the same family. I don't know why I get this copied, but let's go here, border. I want a different shade per pixel, but from the same family, okay? Solid. Okay, I will start from here, but then I want a different shade of the same family, okay? I do like that, and those two will surely work well together. Then I go back, take this maybe, and update my CSS, okay? This is usually the approach that I take. Okay, any question? Am I going too fast? Just tell me. Does padding and margin size respond to the pixel of font sizes using EM? Yes, exactly. What if the font size of parent elements is not specified? As you know, we have always something predefined if you use the main tags. So usually you get always something by default if you don't specify anything. Okay. Cool. All right. So one other thing that we can do with colors is adding gradients. So it can be complicated, but there are some something to reference like CSS gradients.io, which is a pretty cool tool in which you can create how many steps you want, and you have predefined colors. You can input your color that you picked from somewhere else. You can even modify it right here, and then it gives you the compiled property like that. So if we take this, just with a blink of an eye, we created a background, but in this case, we need to use background, not background color, just in case of gradients. So I copied it, we can change the degrees afterwards. And just like that, you can create all sorts of shades. Yeah, and with RGBA, you can even make this, transparent if it's not one, but maybe half, stuff like that. Really, really cool. Yeah, you can have other tools in here. You can have backgrounds. You can have, everything is made with CSS, by the way. So yeah, you can have a starting point, which is probably the blank page problem that everyone has. Let's start from something and modify this a little bit. And this is the best approach. Don't ever think that you need to invent everything, because let's not reinvent the wheel. If this helps you, always reference some other sites that you like. And an advice that I can give you is always take note of something that catch your eye and, you know, get inspiration from that. That means also copying it sometimes, okay? Copying like an artist, not like someone that needs to steal something, okay? Always think about, you know, I see something that I like, not necessarily I want to copy it exactly, but as a starting point, it can help you in the beginning, going over the fear of a blank page. Okay, so I suggest you to don't worry about that. Even try, if you have time, to replicate a website, even this one, you can inspect, see how that is created, as you can see. You can even copy it from here. And the same way, you can start learning by replicating something, okay? Every front-end website can be replicated. The front-end part is always replicatable. You can see how everything is composed. You see there are some margins here, and yeah, everything is inspectable. So I suggest you to do that. Never think that it's something bad to be doing. Okay. Okay, let's go back to the slides. Ooh, multiple tag selectors. We covered the tag one. So yeah, probably the last thing that we need to cover is how can we apply more specificity. Let's see if I talk about specificity already. I think I did, but yeah, should be around here. Inheritance, but yeah. So the way that the browser can decide how to apply a particular color just to one element and not others is by making our selector more specific. The more elements you add here, the more specific it can be ensured. Okay. So what I mean by that, maybe I want just, let's see, maybe we have paragraph outside. We know that we have some properties for all the paragraphs in our document. Okay. But yeah, this paragraph here is not inside of a div anymore. Okay, so we can differentiate this from the others by the fact that this is not inside of a div. Okay, so I don't want any styles here. Okay, so let's grab our element of I don't want any styles here. But as you can see, it got some styles applied, even if we didn't want it. Okay, so those two rules here we specified at the beginning, if you remember, but we have a way in which we want to target only those two paragraphs inside of the div, but not this one. Okay, so let's also add a background to differentiate them. So background color to the paragraph, I want like coral. Okay, so all three of them receive that right now. But what if I want to be more specific and only targeting all the paragraphs inside of the div? Okay, I can create a more specific selector by just prepending the div tag. Okay, this way, this was left alone. Okay, no styles are applied, not even overwritten. They just don't appear because we didn't want to select this. We explicitly asked for any piece inside of a div. And this is how we did it. So let's see, maybe we want to target only, let's say, input type email, okay? So we can have input, and you can select a particular attribute with the square brackets like that. And only for the input type email, I want border color to be green. Let's see if this works. I don't have, okay, yeah. So there are some properties for top and bottom that overrides our border color, but there are a very handy and dangerous keyword, which is important. You know, this will basically override and be the most specific thing in the document if you want. Let's create a whole border with 3 pixel solid green. Okay, and since we want this to be important, this even wins with inline styles. Okay, but it's very dangerous. Don't add this important keyword all around your CSS, because usually you forget about them and spend so much time in understanding why you're not able to override your properties. Okay, so yeah, we have also other types like dotted. You don't see this very often, maybe a particular style of website, but not that very often. The dotted one. You also have dashed, I believe, yeah. But normally we just use the solid one. Okay, so what about specificity that we said earlier? So as you can see, this one has a slightly more specific selector because we have a one here and a one here. If we, here the third place is for generic tags, okay? And this one is for class selectors, and the first one is the ID. We didn't see IDs yet, but an ID is just a specific attribute for one single element only. My specific paragraph, let's say, okay? If I want to reference only this one, I need to use this symbol here, okay? So this is the symbol for the ID. The dot is for the class, and this one is the ID. You cannot use the same ID on two elements because this is just considered bad practice. If you want to apply the same rule to multiple elements, you use a class, just as we did here. So as you can see, the box can go on two different elements, but IDs can should be unique. So in case my second specific paragraph, for example, okay? Or just second. All right, so in here, I would need to reference second like that. Okay, so if I hover here, I can see selector specificity, I get a 1 because it's the most specific. We can even combine them. Let's add an ID here. Let's call this first div. And I can give a class instead here, class first paragraph. Let's delete this. I just want to show you how the rule works. So I can grab first paragraph, and so first div was an ID, right? This one is an ID. I can just select this particular element here by using the parent and then its own class name. Okay, so let's get rid of that. And just like that, I can give this a background color black. And if I hover, I can see I have 1 on the selector specificity because I have an ID on the parent element, and I get a 1 to, because I have a class. I'm specifying a more specific selector rather than our P here, div P. So we can see that now we are overwriting the background color from light coral on the first paragraph with a black, or maybe let's choose a fancier color. Light sky blue. All right, let's see. Okay, so this is how the specificity works. If you want to be very specific, and this is how you can create overrides in a better way. So you can have a base rule for generic paragraphs, but one specific element, maybe you want to make it different. And you can ensure this being different by chaining multiple IDs or classes. Even 2 classes are best than one generic P selector. I hope this makes sense, guys. Otherwise, tell me. It is confusing. Anyone? Should I do a big recap, maybe? An area in which you want to see it again, some things? How are you feeling, guys?
Yeah, actually, you could like do a quick recap.
Okay, so let's go with the slides then. So yeah, what did we see here? We talked about CSS in general. So we just saw how we can determine which rule gets applied by giving the specificity rule. Okay, so always think like the thing that you write last, even if this was the same, will prevail. Okay, will be applied either way. You know, in this case, we applied both of them, but as you can see, the previous one gets you know, slashed away because there's another same selector coming at the bottom. Okay, so even if this was here, the second one will win. Okay, all the time, because the thing that you write after always gets precedence. Okay, but yeah, if we go back like that, even if this comes first and this generic one comes last, we still get the light blue on the first one, because the first one is always more specific, 110 instead of 002. Okay. Yeah, and also even here, if I create another style for all my paragraphs to be of color, background color, better, background color green. So I wouldn't see it on the first two because my import of the external file comes last. But if this wasn't the case anymore, since, okay, I need to make the same rule here, div p, in order to win. But yeah, in this case, I can win. In the other way around, I couldn't. Okay, even the order of imports of your CSS and the order in which the order they receive in the browser reading them will determine which one is more specific. Okay, so there are many things at play. You have inline styles that prevail in regards of a CSS written here, but you know, in case of desperate times comes desperate measures. So the important will always win, even though we have a more specific here. Okay, so this is your last resort. Okay, sometimes it's needed. Maybe you get the CSS from an external framework and you don't have anything else that you can do. You have to deliver your work. So yeah, just know that sometimes you can use the important keyword. Okay, so other than that, let's see. We talked about animation and positioning, which we're going to talk about Friday. How to define styles, inline styles, style tag inside of the HTML, and external style sheets that we can reference always inside of the head tag. Those are the usual styles rule. You can have many of them, of course, you can experiment with. And you will experiment tomorrow, probably, doing your homework. So we talked about the box model. Always think that if you're using Bootstrap, you don't have to worry, but the content will be considered starting from the border and not the content itself anymore. Therefore, you can using the padding to space the content inward and the margin to space your element from the word, the around elements. So in this case, without the box size, the override on the box sizing, even the padding adds up to the total width and height. With the box sizing placed on the border box, this is not the case for the padding, but for the margin, Okay, so we saw that we have absolute sizes in pixels, which are always, and at every display size, the pixel that you place maybe in a font size will always remain the same, okay? So if I place a font size like 3 rem will always be 3 rem even on a smaller viewport, But if you want to create something that by just changing the parent font size, let's say this one, that will change all the rest that is applied through EMs, not REM. Okay. 3 EM of 6, it's 6 times 6 in this case. So in the future, you'll know how to change properties like font size given a different device, be it bigger or smaller, And in that case, you just need to change the fonts, this font size of the parent to change other properties that use EMs. Okay. If you just want to use modularity, even Bootstrap uses REM, which is always taking the 16 pixel unit of the HTML tag, which is the root element. This is why it's called REM, root element unit. Okay. But don't worry if this is too much. I can understand that. But piece by piece, you're going to experiment, and with time and practice, it will come to you. Don't worry about that. So also colors. Yeah, we saw how ways we have to apply colors. In this case, we have those predefined element, predefined named color, which can be quite nice if you look at that. And you can always start from there and change the color accordingly with the panel that I showed you. Just clicking on the box here, you're going to be able to modify this. It will be of the same characteristic, but different hue. For example, if I move this hue bar here, maybe you want to create a family of colors, and it's always a good thing to start moving the hue and not anything else, lightness and saturation. Okay. Okay. So other than that, inheritance. Some properties can be inherited. I can show you a quick list. Find it. So properties that can get inherited. Border collapse, border spacing. You don't need really to worry too much about that. But yeah, there are no list for sure, but this is probably one of them. And as you can see, most of the properties are referencing something about the font and how the font behaves, like line height, text indent, white space. It's everything about characters and the text inside, okay, with some exceptions. But font size, font weight, and everything about font and the color gets inherited for sure. Okay, just remember that. And these properties are also about the text behavior. Okay, so tag selectors, we saw the generic tags selectors, and we saw also how to just determine exactly which one that we want. You can add multiple levels here. For example, if you have a more nested element, you can add the parent, its child, and maybe your element is inner in the chain. Like, for example, let's see, maybe we can add an anchor tag here, and therefore we need a more specific selector only if we want to select, let's say, maybe a span. So the second element in the unordered list has a span inside. Okay, maybe we want, I don't know, another span outside. Okay, so unordered list element and with a span inside, like coral or like salmon. Sorry about that. So let me find a browser here. As you can see, we were able to target just this element here, but not this one. Okay, this one is a span, but it's not inside of a list element. So we were able to navigate from the parent, specifying it that we're looking inside of a list item element, and we specifically are looking for the only element that has a span. Okay, the only list element that has a span, because the other ones don't have a span, therefore they don't receive this color here. This is how you use multiple selectors. Just be more specific, and also to win over other rules if you want, because this has a 3 in here. Given the fact that this has only a 1, this could have 1 in some cases. Okay. Everything clear, guys? Is it too much? Don't worry, we can recap something on Friday. But yeah, just take in those new concepts and try to make them yours and experiment with them tomorrow. Okay, we need to start somewhere. This is our starting point. If you stick with it and you're brave enough to to come out of this Ignite course, I think you'll be a better developer than before. That's for sure. So thank you for bearing with me. I'll be waiting for you on Friday with another lecture, hopefully. Thank you very much. Have a great night and see you soon, guys.